Rafael Sandroni. I'm the founder of the GardionAI, is a AI security company. Usually I mix Brazilian coffee with Italian mocha, so that's the best combination. But I like the espresso.
We'll be back for another MLOps community podcast. I'm your host, Demetrios, and today we're talking with Rafa all about the security vectors that you got to watch out for when it comes to building apps or just using LLMs. I particularly enjoyed the moment that we touched on traditional fraud detection that he's done at places like New Bank, New NU. Shout out to their engineering blog. And then we contrast that with these days, the kind of fraud that you can do when it comes to LLMs and if you have AI systems in place. Let's get into this conversation with my man Rafa. I know you were working on Siri, and I know that you were doing stuff that was to help Siri understand other languages, but Siri's been around for a while. It's also been pretty wild how the evolution of Siri has been happening. And you posted some stuff that caught my eye on LinkedIn about like how to make assistants, AI assistants better, things that you need to like keep in mind when you're creating AI assistants. What are some of these things that you've recognized as best practices that you can share from your time doing that? And I know Apple has some pretty strong NDAs, so you don't need to get into specifics, but just what are some key learnings?
Okay, so what I understand is that with the LLMs, the APIs and so on, is much easier to everyone to create AI assistants. And based on my experience, I don't know, Siri is the one of the like top 5 AI users in the world. It's a huge problem to make sure that everything is going like a testing, make sure that the response have a is like a kind of a quality, but also the orchestration, like depending of what AI assistant is this. So you need to orchestrate, integrate with APIs. You need to make sure that everything is integrated, test, disintegrate, because I don't know, you need to make sure that you have contracts between the integration, the tests as well. So you can see recently using a mix of AI and human to test. Yeah, I will say like the test is one of the most important part. Like if you are creating some value for people, you need to make sure that the this AI assistant is like working well. It's not, you don't have a kind of regression. So I work at City on some components to make sure guardrails, to make sure that you don't have a kind of ulcers referencing like a kind of profanity and competitors and so on. And if you think about, I don't know, a bank using this is regulatory markets that have a kind of regulatory as well. You need to make sure that the answers of this AI is you have a kind of control, right? So yeah, so recapping tests, the integration, make sure I have a kind of contract, and also controlling, like I have like guardrails or controlling the output
Yep.
is a good start point.
I feel like Siri is the ideal abstraction layer that I want an agent to play at or an assistant because it can do anything on the phone and it can go into the apps. I wish it could go deeper into the apps, right? But I guess that's just each app has to make things discoverable for Siri. And so there's this question, do I want to have my own AI assistant inside of my app, or do I want to have Siri be the AI assistant inside of my app? And that type of thing potentially are what different apps have to grapple with all the time. You were doing the guardrails before guardrails were cool and before there was these huge blunders. So it's funny to think about if you didn't do your job well, Apple could have been the Air Canada. It could have had that brand awareness that no brand really wants. But then I know you went and after you working at Apple, you went and worked for one of my favorite engineering blogs of all time, which was New Bank, right? And New Bank is awesome because of how transparent they are in their engineering blog. I think they're I say this a lot, but I don't say it enough. The Nubank engineering blog, I've learned so much from them, and they are so transparent that I'm thankful for that. What were you doing at Nubank?
Yeah, so it's a little bit complex because I spent almost 3 years over there, and I had the opportunity to work together with, be part of this team. But I guess the important part, the thing that I like at Nubank is like sharing like knowledge. So you have a lot of, let's say, workforce meetups internally to make sure that everyone is in the same bar. And my first experience at Nubank was interesting because I was part of, let's say, a new feature internally. You are building a personal finance assistant for Nubank users, and it was part of my startup, my that I founded years ago.
Oh, nice.
And you had the opportunity to create the basis of this AI assistant. And the funny part, I was Nubank decided to buy one of my competitors, like a personal finance management app. And I was part of the due diligence, understanding internal tools and so on.
No
So
way.
it was an interesting part building this AI assistant. I guess now it is part of the new Bake app, helping people to have savings, controlling the savings, have a better planning, financial planning. And but after that, I was part of like a fraud and team, like was basically the same. And the challenges was like, I guess maybe you saw this blog post about the real-time machine learning models for fraud. I guess every fintech and bank you have this challenge like understanding blocking fraudsters in transactions online or like onboarding for new customers. And yeah, I had the opportunity to like create the tools, like doing retraining models automatically for to understand and update the models with like a new patterns, and also improving this the performance of this model. So there is an interesting blog post about this. Uh,
Yeah, and that was all traditional ML, right? So you went from
yeah,
with Siri, you were working on traditional ML, or you were doing the guardrails, or you were doing software engineering. What do you feel like the evolution was there between those two?
yeah, it's a kind of funny to say traditional ML because I know when you say NLP, I believe it's traditional ML, right? But yeah, but I believe everything is connected, right? Probably in a level of maturity of AI, you need to implement traditional ML. You need to go out of APIs and implement a kind of some models internally to have more control. So not only the LLMs to use open source, but also, I don't know, if you need Guardrails, probably the best way to go to traditional NLP, like a classifier using small language models and implement this. But the challenges is like around not only the AI, but the software engineering, like how to deploy. Yeah. So I I believe that everything is connected. It's easier right now to starting using AI, right? But I guess the challenge is the same of 4 or 5 years ago. So if you need traditional ML, so the challenge is the same.
All right, now talk to me about what you've been learning about recently.
Yeah, so this is the interesting part of this talk. But I left Apple months ago to start something, and I started learning about AI security, how to make sure that every AI application, AI assistant is like it's protected. Guys like fraudsters, hackers, and so on. So I started with the WASP top thing for LLMs. So later I joined as a member to understand more the challenges. And it's a huge problem, to be honest. Everyone that I'm talking about, like banks, larger fintechs, healthcare companies, legal startups, local, like everyone is like implementing, but it's a kind of challenging topic because you need to make sure you need to, some people like,
So basically, they want to get hacked and then they want to put a password manager in place.
yeah. So basically, so depends of the culture of the company. So I guess the banks and the financial markets is more like aware of these risks. So they face the same challenges on the software side. So probably the AI, they are taking care of this. But that's an interesting part. I would say that you have two components of to make sure that to implement like security standards on AI. So the first is you need to implement the AI following a zero trust approach. So make sure that you have the permissions, the credentials, and the integration is safe. But after that, you need to do like a kind of test, security test, so red teaming, the same way that you have like a pen test in the software side. So to discover the vulnerabilities, understanding these vulnerabilities, like you have the opportunity to fix on your implementation or implement use guardrails. So this the second part is a way to following the zero trust approach. So you don't believe that the LLM is 100 safe, and we can implement these guardrails not only for the security, but also, let's say, to prevent like a kind of hallucinations, a kind of off top, and so on. And the security part of the guardrails is very challenging because these guardrails, you should learn, you should, this model should know what patterns, what's like a prompt injection methods that have more effectiveness. So to block these attempts. Yeah. So an overview of the AI security, I would say like starting on the AI applications. So have these components.
So as you're looking at these different vectors that LLMs can be basically corrupted on, and you're thinking about guardrails, you're also thinking about zero trust. First of all, I would love to understand what you mean by zero trust for the LLMs. What does that actually look like in practice?
The same approach like when you implement a software, so make sure that you don't have you have the access just for that function, for that for that resource. So in AI is the same thing. So if you have like AI assistant that have access to APIs and other tools, like making sure that the scope is very defined, the access, the permission is like very defined. Basically, it's like an approach that the developers, the dev team can follow and just in the implementation.
Yep, that makes sense.
It's more like a mindset.
And trying to limit the scope, which is a hard thing to do, or it's a very fine line, because with the LLMs, they generally perform better the more context you give them. And so you want to give them as much context as possible, as long as it is the right permissions. And so trying to figure that out and trying to architect your system in a way that is going to know who has permission to what can get a little tricky. Have you seen good ways of doing that?
What do you mean about the permission here?
So I guess it would be like who has access to what data, who has access to what documents, that type of permission. And then, because you don't want an LLM to be able to, maybe it has access to every database or every channel in Slack. But if I'm asking a question, I don't have access to every channel in Slack, right? And then all of a sudden the LLM does. And so I'm able to find out things that I am not privy to.
Yeah, so this is a part of making sure, like defining what's the most important data to share with the AI. So you don't have to share out of your database with the AI, and maybe you don't you need to share out of your data table for with AI. So it's complex, but I guess is following this mindset and being more like restrictive about the data.
And then so we were talking about the different attack vectors that you've been seeing, and one of them was jailbreaking, one of them was red teaming. I think people have seen a lot of examples of those on the internet. What have you been thinking about when it comes to the security vulnerabilities, and then making sure that guardrails work? Like, how do you architect the guardrails so that they are more effective?
I guess the most challenging vulnerability of AI is the prompt injection. So we can pass some context, do a kind of social engineering with AI, and then I don't know, have access to some data. The system prompt will be like the first step to understand more dynamic of the AI or AI agent. I believe like implementing the right guardrails to prevent that to have, let's say, malicious inputs that can affect your LLM or your AI agents, like the chain of LLMs. You'll be you'll be like the best practices. So that's what I'm seeing right now in the industry. So it's not the finally, it's a kind of mitigation. It's like it's not 100%, but it can eliminate a good part of fraudsters or malicious users that can try to expose your AI. So, and usually this guardrail, so you implement this as like a real time. You are implementing the orchestration and it's working real time, blocking some patterns. And also, if you have applications that have access to the internet or documents or data that you are not the owner, you should make sure that you should like a filter and make sure that you don't have an indirect injection. So there's a example, a very interesting as a example from the conference called Black Hat, of one guy trying through the Microsoft Copilot that was configured to summarize emails. And basically, it opened vulnerabilities that an external person can could send an email to this corporation and then just a gap. So every email could be like summarized. And in the last step, let's say replied with the AI agent, depending of the topic. And this external user send an email with a prompt injection hidden bit by the human eyes, but like using encoding and colors. But the AI code understand and then it is starting sending phishing emails for every email in the user base. So it's an example. So if you have access to external road, you should make sure that you don't trust on the prompt instructions. Don't put your guardrails on the system prompt. Use like independent models, machine learning models, to filter and detect this kind of, let's say, patterns. So it's very challenging again because it's not 100%. You can like it's just a mitigation, so you can be like 100% safe. But
So let me see if I understood that black hat example, because that is a new one that I haven't heard before, where if someone is using Copilot and it's in their email, then you can get a phishing email that has white on white text. So white text on a white background that the human eye is not going to see, but the Copilot will see, and it will think, oh, cool, I can summarize this. And when it summarizes it, then that goes into the LLM and it does an indirect prompt injection, which says basically send an email or summarize this email and send it back to XYZ. And so if you don't have two things in place, one, just the human touch that needs to okay the send or return reply email, or two, that you have some kind of a external independent critic that is judging what the Copilot LLM call or agent is doing, and then it's saying, hey, look, here's all the information, here's what I did, is this correct? Here's the prompt, here's what I've done, here's what information I got. And then you have that judge that says yes or no, this is correct or this isn't. You might want to go back to step one. So you could get into a whole lot of trouble if that is not what you're doing and how you're architecting it. So I've seen that in a way, that type of design pattern where you have almost like this catch-all critic at the end, and you can throw everything into it and you can say, looking at all of these steps, this is what I've done. What do you think? Is this the right way of doing it?
Yeah, I guess the point is that looking for you have a judge, LLM is a judge, and the same vulnerability that you have in the LLM, you have on this LLM as a judge. I guess the solution that I'm saying this is like using traditional machine learning classifiers, and that you don't have the same vulnerability of the LLM. It's not LLM, and then we can mitigate. Don't expose another channel, another space.
Okay, so you're saying don't even use another LLM because then you might just get this
Yeah,
cascade of prompt injections.
yeah. Don't use another LLM to filter malicious inputs because this another LLM can suffer, can follow these malicious inputs as well.
Uh-huh. And what are some other ways that you've been seeing security vulnerabilities or some real life examples of things that are happening in the wild?
I'm working with some fintechs, understanding the challenges and like validating these business thesis, so validating some ideas around AI security. There are some companies, the fintechs, working building AI assistant on the WhatsApp, and these AI assistants can do transfers, bank transfers, can pay bills, and so on. So we have basically like AI assistant that have access to your bank account, or in other scenarios, you have your bank account managed by AI on the WhatsApp. Yeah, the trick part is that I saw an interesting example recently. Some hackers trying to override the file, of the transfer, for example, or override the account balance that you have in your account. So this in real life. So you actually don't have you, you don't have a lot of problems because this scenario that I'm explaining, like these startups had, let's say, infrastructure as a banking in the core. So we have another kind of validation. But that's why it's important to follow like the zero trust mindset, because we can like defend and protect these malicious behaviors on the software part, not the AI as well. But it's important because out as well, so you can have the AI trying to answer something that is following some bias and talking about competitors and generating a kind of reputational risk for the company. So
I'm trying to think how that looks and what the benefit would be of having me be able to do my banking through WhatsApp. And so I guess the benefit for a end user like myself, I'm using WhatsApp and I say, "Oh, send $50 to Rafa." And then it knows which Rafa I'm going to send it to and it will send it, or I tag Rafa as a person and then it has your phone number in my contacts book and it will then send it to you. But it feels like there's so many things that can go wrong there because it could just hallucinate a different Rafa or a different phone number or whatever. There's so many vulnerabilities that I wonder if the small lift that we get from being able to interact with our bank account on WhatsApp is worth the gigantic risk that it brings.
yeah, I guess that's the challenging of the developers, the ML engineers nowadays. You should follow the tests, have the kind of AI quality constantly to make sure that it doesn't happen. And I believe that you're learning how to create this kind of application, right? Like this mission critical application. Yeah, that's a very challenging, but I guess very interesting problem to work on.
Yeah, it does feel like we're still exploring where and how we are going to interact best with AI assistants, AI agents, what the ways that the public prefers to use them. And like you said, maybe for a banking app, it's not the best option, but potentially for a food app, it is the best because we can just text the food app and say, "I'm hungry, I want something in the next 30 minutes." And it gives me 5 different suggestions. And then I can just say, "Yeah, I go with suggestion 2." But if it's for a banking app and it's send $20, and next thing you know, I sent $2,000 because there was some kind of a mess up or a hallucination, then it's a lot more risk than if I get pizza or pita.
So what I'm saying is you have this, I don't know, you have AI bank assistant, like you can talk with it's not
Yeah.
an app. So depends. I believe that there is a profile, a specific customer profile for this application. And so it's riskier, but I don't know. I believe that the market's going on this side. I don't know, looking for early stage fintechs building on this space, but later in the next years, I don't know, like banks could have a new channel as the same of the mobile. So
Yeah.
we have these legacy assistants, banking assistant, and then they try to follow the fintechs and build the mobile application, make sure that like the UX is nicer, everything is smoother, and maybe the next wave you'll be like having an AI helping people to like make a transfer, understanding the expense and so on. It's a mission critical application, more critical than asking for ordering a food. But I believe that there is a value of this application have value from the some customer profiles.
Yeah. And when you have worked on traditional fraud detection systems, and then you think about these new ways of fintechs having fraud vectors, how do you weigh these different areas and vulnerabilities? And like, how do you think about traditional fraud and almost, I don't know what the new one would be called, but I'm going to coin it. I'm going to say new age fraud. What do you look at? Is it different? Is it the same in your mind? How do you view those two?
I believe that with AI, both of parts of a fraud, the fraudster and the, let's say, the bank, it's like they have superpowers. So it's the fraudster have like the tools to create liveness face and fake documents and so on. For them, it's becoming easier to bypass a fraud system, and also internally inside fraud a bank, a fraud thing. I guess you have the tools, but it's a challenging moment looking for this new kind of AI. But also we have the fraud around the AI, like the interaction. So it's a kind of fraud as well. So basically you have more vulnerabilities around. We have the fraudsters with superpowers, with AI superpowers, trying to figure out like what is the vulnerability that they could like follow and deep dive. And I don't know, it's a challenging moment. If you look for the cybersecurity as well, so not only on the financial space, but the cybersecurity in general. So it's a challenging moment because they think you have seen increase of incidents, security incidents. That's because the fraudsters, the hacker have more powers right now. They can automate, speed up the process that we spend 1 month with some minutes with AI.
Yeah, and you're able to just test where the vulnerabilities are so much quicker.
I believe that the fraud, the same dynamics of a fraud in the that you know right now nowadays, you see this dynamic in AI as well. I guess the challenge will be this almost the same. So we have some fraudster trying to injection, doing prompt injection, and on the other side you have the guardrails or other research to protect them, learning the new patterns and so on. I don't know, maybe human in the loop as you have in the fraud operation as well. Maybe you should have this human in the loop in the AI operation as well.
Huh. Yeah, you make a great point about how many different levels there are that fraudsters can play at, because it can just be falsifying documents, or now these days you can clone voices with just like 5 seconds of voice. And so you can do social fraud and get information by doing those like social hacks. And then on the other hand, you have the LLMs themselves and how they can be vulnerable. And you have the new systems that we're putting into place. Like we talked about how, okay, now we're talking to our bank through WhatsApp. There's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that come along with that. Or you have this super powered fraudster who can use AI to their advantage and scan for security vulnerabilities or fraud vulnerabilities. Are there specific design patterns that you've been seeing that are now becoming very common and something that is like table stakes for if you're trying to deal with AI fraud on any of these levels?
So I believe that knowing by first hand the vulnerability that a fraudster can attack, it's important. So doing the red teaming, testing your system, doing a pen test on software and red teaming in general, I guess it's a must have. You should do it before. So if you have a mission critical application and so on, that's the best way. So you can have the by first hand knowing the vulnerabilities and then trying to protect this, implementing the protection. I believe it's approach that is becoming more common. And also as well, like the guardrails, implementing the correct guardrails for the applications, like depending of the use case, depending of like the preparation, the risks that you like to accept or not.
All right. So what other kind of things have you been seeing out there in the wild?
AI agents. Actually, there is a recent paper report from OWASP for about the vulnerabilities in the AI agents. And it's interesting because when you have a lot of many LLMs talk with each other, it's become like more complex to make sure to control. LLM is not predictable, and we have a lot of LLMs working together. It's even unpredictable. And the problem is that in the AI agents application, it can, let's say, with a combination of tokens, like say attack, can broke the first one, but the context, the information, then a kind of noise can follow through the next steps. And also depending of the steps, if we have some documents, data to access externally, one simple, well, let's say one prompt injection that was received in the first step can affect, I don't know, the the last steps, you know.
Uh-huh.
But it's more like a general, it's not a example, a specific example, but it's interesting because you can have a kind of noisy going forward for each step. More LMs, more, yeah, yes, more LMs you have in your assistant, more protection you should have to make sure that you don't have this information, just noise information going forward.
Yeah, it's almost like one prompt injection can get propagated throughout the whole chain of agent calls, and you have to make sure to architect your agents in a way that, like we were talking about before, potentially it's not even another LLM call critic at the end. It is something that is a bit stronger and more rules-based type of guardrails that you have. I'm also looking at the OWASP.org page right now on their top 10 vulnerabilities. And I find it fascinating that the first one is broken access control because I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out how to get agents to act on their behalf. And this just feels like a wasp is calling it out early and saying, hey, look, you can try and have the agent act on your behalf, but there's a lot of potential that you're going to have some access control issues here.
Yeah, this is the challenge because it's a balance between autonomy and the security, right?
Yeah.
This is the challenging part. I don't know. You have been seeing a lot of value from agents that do your steps by themselves, but I guess this is a part of the zero trust approach that you should follow. So to make sure that like you have the right permissions, is restricted for that task, for that scope, and so on.
Yeah. These are things you as a machine learning engineer going into this world of security, it feels like you had some experience when it comes to the fraud detection side of things, but now you're having to learn a lot about, I'm sure, the security side of things. And are there pieces that you wish you knew When you started going into this world, what are some things that potentially you can just share as a nugget of insider knowledge that took you a while to figure out, but now that you know, you're very happy that you do? I would even classify that a little bit further and say, what are some things you've learned in the last 3 months that you did not realize as a machine learning engineer, but now you see as like you're getting into the security world?
Yeah, the first thing is that fraudsters and hackers, they are like, they have a lot of creativity. So even as a machine learning engineer, you're building an AI, LLM, and so on. You don't know what's the vulnerabilities. So there is like someone can use a base 64 and encoding a kind of method A, B, or C. But when you put it in the road, like a lot of new stuff, so you didn't figure out like that people can do this, and it's very wild. And one of the most the learns that I did recently is joining cybersecurity engineers with understanding, talk with these guys, and learning their perspective about AI security. So because it's different as a AI machine learning engineer or AI research is different. Is another, they have another opinions. Is so let's say when you do run teaming, they are not taking care of just the LLM, but the whole system, for example.
Yeah.
So it's important. And also about the protection, the guardrail, they don't, it's not looking just for the LLM, but the whole system as well. So the access, the permission, and so on. And yeah, I guess the insight that I have recently is they have another perspective. It's more broader about the AI system in general. I'm researching about the guardrails, security guardrails, data. It's important. So as like we are building guardrails, you should have data to understand what kind of and methods that like hackers are using or should or could use to bypass AI or these guardrails. Data is important, and if you look for just for the open source data that you have, is not enough.
Oh,
And
interesting. Wait, tell me more about that. So it's like you should A, try to red team your own system, pen test your own system, and thinking about the system as a whole, trying to break into it in any which way possible, not just the LLM. But then if you're only doing that, you don't know what you don't know. And when you put something out live, it's going to get hit by the very creative hackers that they are. And so is it like you should get a third party to try and pen test also? Or is it that you should, like, how do you get that data if you don't have it and you don't know that you don't know?
yeah, you should choose, I don't know, if you have an open source model that was trained on this data, or you have, I don't know, a tool or provider that works on this, that collect the data, filter this data to train like the guardrails models. That's because it's very difficult to create the guardrails by internally by itself. So it can use LLMs as well, but it's vulnerable as well. And also to create small language models, you should have data. So it's a challenge, it's like a cat and hat. The challenge is this, like you should what the best way here to collect data is to work together with the cybersecurity team, the red teaming, to understand the patterns, and then implement this solution.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes sense.
and I believe, I don't know, you have more, you see more open source, open science, and open source model around AI security. You don't have many tools and models on this space. Let's say some models that you could use as a guardrails and make sure that everything is okay. So it's part of a path that I'm looking for, like to create more a kind of open science around it.
Yeah, almost like the trick there is that as soon as you put out a data set that can help you understand where there are attack vulnerabilities, that data set is no longer valuable
Yeah.
because it needs to be behind closed doors. It needs to be something that is almost not shareable or not public.
Yeah, do you mean the data, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a challenge of collecting data, collecting new patterns, learning, and then updating it constantly.
So like almost like this, as we did in traditional ML and as you did a ton on retraining fraud models, you're in a way continuously collecting data and then retraining these LLMs. But you're not retraining them in the sense that you're not going and you're not going to train or fine tune the LLM. You're just updating your, maybe it's your prompt, or maybe it is the LLM calls, something like that.
Yeah, I believe that's a good point. Iterating around learning and iterating and improving, right? Yeah, it's a must-have process to you can inspire on the traditional ML and use it in the AI application, LLM applications.